Very, very good, very good. Today, a young man on acid realized that all matter is merely energy condensed to a slow vibration. That we are all one consciousness experiencing itself subjectively. There's no such thing as death. Life is only a dream, and we are the imagination of ourselves. All right, welcome to this talk. So, essentially, I was a little bit delayed because we were still filling up the little bottles with a VibeCam recorder, but you're gonna get it in a second. The very, very first concept that I want to communicate to all of you guys is the concept of Qualia mastery. And also, please let me know if you can't hear me. I'm happy to try to work something out. Okay, so Qualia mastery is an aesthetic that I've essentially been trying to cultivate recently. And it has three components that I resonate a lot with. It's kind of like a guiding principle in meditation, psychedelic research, and in general, just like introspection, research, and psychology. So the three principles of Qualia mastery is, number one, to actually be curious about the state space of consciousness. Actually be really, really curious about what's out there and trying to understand it and experience it for ourselves. You know, actually having the first person experience of, you name it, any state of consciousness, to actually know what it is like. However, there's another very important ingredient, which is number two, which is in Qualia mastery, you also want to understand it intellectually. Now, this might be controversial in some schools of thought, like for example, very dogmatic Zen. You know, I've heard a lot of very dogmatic Zen practitioners saying like, it's not about understanding it, you know, it's just about first person experience. It's just about the immediacy of experience. You know, the thinking mind is just getting in the way. But I would say that is just a mode, the mode of not thinking, the mode of immediacy. It's just a mode. It's a very helpful mode. It's one that is very, very nice and good to master. But there are things to do, there are places to go, there's people to meet, there's things to understand. And if you are just in the no thinking mode, you're just gonna miss out big time, big time. And on top of that, you're not gonna be able to participate in the third component of Qualia mastery, which is doing it for the benefit of all sentient beings. Woo! Because, you know, immediate first person, you know, experiential embodiment of a state of consciousness is good, but doesn't generalize, right? What we actually want is to develop a better philosophy, vocabulary, science, practices, and culture that allows us to actually share and understand and intellectually digest what is going on in consciousness collectively. You know, I think that is something very, very nice to aspire to, and it's something that you will not get to if you're only concerned about, well, I want to experience it myself without developing a language, a culture, vocabulary, practice, community, culture for it. So that is the Qualia mastery aesthetic. I put out a series of guided meditations recently on YouTube, the Qualia Research Institute channel. It's like 9 of them. It more or less goes through essentially some of the core principles for how to kind of like get in kind of the groove of applying this aesthetic across the board, especially in consciousness research. In a second, well, probably in a few minutes, we will get actually the scent of the day, the scent of the event, if you guys allow me to say that. But before that, I will actually kind of like give you a little bit of kind of like a taste of what may be Qualia mastery in the context of understanding a, you know, poorly understood Qualia variety might look like. The reason I am so interested in scents, you know, and, you know, for the record, you know, it's not my full-time job. It's not what I spend most of my time thinking on. It's just a hobby. But because I think I apply a particular mindset of curiosity and inquisitive mindset of trying to understand and experience it for myself, actually there's so much low-hanging fruit just waiting to be collected in phenomenological fields in general. And the case of scent is actually just one that is, hey, most people have the ability to experience scent. Most people have no idea for how to describe scent. And in fact, it's very cheap to explore it. So it's just a very, very kind of immediate, easy, you know, open ground for safely exploring Qualia space and testing the capacity for your frameworks to actually generate insight about these state spaces of consciousness. So the first scent that I actually will show you is called Glacial Gumdrop. You can actually get this one on the website. So I'm gonna spray it on a bunch of these and just pass it around. There's not gonna be enough for everybody, so just share one with your neighbors. So the scent Glacial Gumdrop illustrates one aspect of the state space of scent that is quite interesting and very important. All right, just pass these around.
You want to meet?
Okay, so the story goes, once I asked the DMT entity, can you tell me something new, meaningful, non-trivial about the state space of scent? You know, something that like nobody else knows, you know? And actually I was expecting some kind of like crazy download of like looking at the, you know, the geometry of scent or something like that. But no, it doesn't work like that. Actually what I got was a riddle. And the riddle was, are you sure that the state space of scent is just one kind of qualia? That was it. And you know, upon thinking about it a lot, it actually turns out that the state space of scent is not just one qualia, it's more that it's three kinds of qualia that come together, and because they come together at once, we tend to confuse them, and they're so correlated, we just blend them together. But the very first one is essentially tactile elements. Like, you may not be very aware of these, but actually scents have a very, very significant tactile element. The particular one that you guys are smelling is one that essentially has two very significant tactile elements. One very common one, which is coolness, or cold. You know, like menthol, wintergreen, spearmint type scents. They're cooling. You know, this is not just an illusion. Well, of course it's an illusion. It's not literally cooling you, but it is lowering the threshold of activation for neurons that detect temperature changes. So it is, you know, the qualia of coldness, literally, and it's a tactile feeling. And, you know, it's not synesthesia, this is actually tactile, okay? So, but in the realm of tactile experiences on scent, there is a lot of things. So the next thing that I will do, and, you know, very simple instruction here. This is for, at the end, hopefully I will get them back. Actually, it doesn't matter all that much if I don't get them back, but just keep the lead with it and kind of like pass it to your neighbor with the lead, so like the leads don't get confused, so they don't, their scents don't get mixed up essentially. But throughout the talk, you know, you're going to be passed around this kind of like bucket of different scents, and I want you to kind of like explore and try to introspect on what is going on with these scents. Okay, so the reason I'm talking about this right now is that there's actually one of them that is chili. There's actually a chili scent here. And chili also has a very definite tactile component, kind of like prickly, hot, slightly uncomfortable, but you know, it's part of the state space. We're curious about it. Okay, so please, yeah, feel free to like take them out of the bag and pass them on. Okay, so that's like the tactile element. You know, that's like number one. Number two is actually just the flavor. And this is the one that usually when people talk about scents is what people are talking about, which is, hey, is this like lemon? Is this vanilla? You know, is this like pine? Kind of like the more typical semantic reference, and is the closest in essence to something like various taste components. You know, like sweet, sour, salty, even umami. Like all of those have a correspondence in scent. There is a lot that you can explain in scent in terms of essentially dynamic interplays between the flavor components. For example, I really entice you at some point to really smell a scent such as like pear, and introspect on the quality of pear. And also, I encourage people to sit down if you're comfortable. I guess especially the people closer to me. But essentially, pear. Next time you smell pear or apple or especially those, you will notice that there is a dynamic interplay between a sweet component and a sour component. And they're both smashed together very tightly. And they're essentially kind of like struggling for your attention. And you're getting a strange alloy of sweet and sour. You know, this definitely happens with several fruits. In my experience, pear is a very good example of this. So That's a flavor element. Okay, but then the last element is the most, subtle and hard to describe. But thankfully, I have some examples of that. So these are also two magical creatures. You can get them on the website. This is a eau de cologne vide. Essentially, the idea of this scent is the aspects of a cologne or a perfume that add kind of like a reverb or echo or kind of distortion effect to the flavors and to the tactile elements. Maybe some of you have heard of like Isoe Super or Ambroxan. It's like one of the first things you start learning with perfumery. And Ambroxan essentially almost like smells like nothing. But if you combine it with anything, it's gonna make it very, very smooth. So like, for example, adding vanilla and pine together. If they're just like coming at the same time, essentially you're gonna get this flickering effect between vanilla and pine. Pine and vanilla together, on their own, what happens is that you get kind of like this like flickering effect between pine and vanilla very, very fast. If you add Ambroxan on top of that, then you actually get a reverb effect where you get an actual alloy between pine and vanilla, which is a solid scent. And that is to me one of the key, kind of insights or kind of like demonstrations that the state space of scent is actually non-Euclidean. It means that along some dimensions, the capacity to discern subtle variabilities collapses because there's something like a musk or something like a Isoe Super that essentially blends it together. Okay, so I'm gonna show you Dust Devil, which essentially is one that has a lot of character impact. Like the whole point of it is essentially like a very, very reverb-y scent. And I'll do that now. So just as with a Glacial Gumdrop, also like pass it around. Okay, and then yeah, the final of the magical creatures is the Eau de Cologne Vide. Similar idea, just very, very different frequencies. The interesting of Eau de Cologne Vide is actually all of the character impacts are completely natural. Well, they're actually synthetic, but they come from natural sources, or rather, they appear in natural sources, such as like lavender, bergamot, neroli, things like that. All right, so this is Eau de Cologne Vide. Okay, so again, all of this might sound kind of like, to some extent, trivial. For some people, scent really comes down to something like, oh, is the milk good or bad, right? It's like, for a lot of people, scent is just not a very large part of their experiential world or world simulation. And to be honest, that's also kind of me, especially, 3 years ago. I wasn't that interested in scent. It's just a playground. Again, like some place where you can apply, safely and reliably all of these like tools to kind of like develop the mastery to explore the state space of consciousness. The next thing I'm going to mention is a little bit about kind of like how does Quillia mastery would apply essentially to something like psychedelic research. So actually we're going to go, I guess like a contingent of us, maybe there's big overlap in this crowd, we're going to go to psychedelic science right after this. Essentially, yeah, like the biggest, psychedelic conference in the world. It has been touted, and to a large extent this is true, very, very large extent this is true. It is touted as kind of a celebration of the achievement of the field of neuroscience, that we're finally, studying psychedelics, putting people in fMRI, doing this legally. This is all wonderful. Wonderful, wonderful. Woohoo, woo! However, there are, and I hope I don't offend anybody here, some very embarrassing results about this type of research. For example, very recently, actually just a few weeks ago, very prominent paper from a very prominent lab, which I'm not going to name, concluded based on, the standard psychedelic research methods available nowadays, that there is no subjective difference between LSD versus LSD and MDMA. That adding MDMA to LSD doesn't change the quality of the LSD experience. Okay, how do they do this? Combining LSD and MDMA is called candy flipping in drug culture, maybe also officially. Here's the thing. In 5 minutes, literally 5 minutes to talking to psychonauts who have had like a lot of different experiences, maybe hundreds of experiences like this. We can come up with a questionnaire that actually talks about like the actual subjective differences that come when you add MDMA to LSD. Did this research use that as a tool or kind of like as an asset? No. What they did was take, the standardized, well-known mystical experiences questionnaire and similar, and essentially right after a person's experience, they essentially had them fill out the questionnaire. Now, it's double-blind, placebo-controlled. You don't know whether you're getting LSD or MDMA. On top of that, the participants, hadn't taken LSD or MDMA more than like a certain number of times. That was part of the inclusion criteria. And yes, if you do it in that way, yeah, there's not much of a difference. At the same time, if you talk to meditators, if you talk to psychedelic users, the mystical experiences questionnaire really sucks. It's just not a very good indication of like actually what is going on in states of consciousness. In some sense, the state of the field is kind of the blind are trying to study vision or something like that, and they're not interested in actually looking at vision themselves. It's just like, let's use these questionnaires that were developed for tactile feelings and just throw them at, at vision research. So in some sense, I also, for the field, and in some sense, yeah, personally, I feel very embarrassed by that kind of result. The same approach also determined that there's no subjective difference between psilocybin, LSD, and mescaline, which, again, anybody who has like significant experience with those substances will know that's definitely not the case. Okay, so how can we improve this? Well, it's sort of like low-hanging fruit everywhere, absolutely everywhere. Recently, QRI ran a contest, and I'm going to show some images of that later today if I get the projector to work. But essentially in the barn, I'm going to show some images. They're called psychedelic cryptography. Essentially, what we did was to run a contest, international contest with cash prizes, where you had to submit a video or an image that doesn't make sense if you're sober, but if you're actually high on a psychedelic, you can decipher. I think this is, it's not just a trivial thing. This is very significant. Why is it significant? Because if you can show that there are actual information embedded in an image or a video or audio that is only perceptible to somebody in the right state of consciousness, and it's true, it's actually there, it's not hallucinated, you have just demonstrated a computational advantage to that state of consciousness. Now, that type of approach, that type of lens, is in stark contrast to, for example, another type of research that is done in academia nowadays, which is give people ketamine and administer them IQ tests, which, okay, unsurprisingly, your IQ is a little lower on ketamine. But you're not learning anything interesting based on that. But with something like psychedelic cryptography, actually having incentives and a community of people who are trying to find in what ways are you actually better at processing information, then you're honing in on what's special and interesting and valuable about those state spaces of consciousness. And so, open invitation for sure, and please, look at that and try to improve it. Try to find better ways of doing psychedelic cryptography. For your information, the winners, all of them used the most simple method possible. I can explain it very easily. Essentially, this is when use tracer effects. You move your hand around and you see kind of extra copies of your hand on a psychedelic. Well, with LEDs or something like that, you can paint pictures using psychedelics because the images last longer, they linger. So that is a very definite but kind of trivial computational advantage. I think we can do a lot better, and already we have discovered about 3 to 4, depending on how you count, completely new and much more interesting ways of doing psychedelic cryptography. But of course, if any of you figures out a new way, produces an image that actually works, I'm gonna feature you in the blog, in QRI, I'm gonna interview you. So yeah, definitely, it's a big incentive. Please work on that. It's gonna help the field a lot. Okay, here's oh, thank you, beautiful. Here's another very important thing. And that is, right now, kind of there's 3 approaches to study consciousness. 2 of them have been explored quite a bit, and one third one is really emerging. And I would say QRI is sort of the tip of the spear of trying to champion that approach. The first one is kind of this standard academic approach of you give people substances or meditation practices, you put them on fMRI, and oftentimes part of the inclusion criteria is that they don't have a lot of experience with this. So that is kind of fresh and new for them. Okay, so the second approach is, one individual explorer goes very, very deep. Somebody like Timothy Leary or John Lilly or Terence McKenna. And we all know that there's like some failure modes with that, right? Like they tend to end up like in outer space with their own, overfit models about reality. And, they're not very focused on testability or actually generating a valuable, vocabulary for other people to use. Well, there is a third approach, which is the think tank model, where you actually gather super smart people who are very emotionally stable, very intelligent, very technically capable. They can draw, they have artistic skills, meditation practice, a lot of psychedelic practice, and you actually have them as a team looking at these states of consciousness. Let me ask you something. Okay, in the 19th century, how did we figure out the equations for electromagnetism? Was it by taking people off the streets, putting them in a room, having them play with magnets for 5 minutes, and then asking them in a questionnaire afterwards, how did it feel to play with the magnets? No. What happened is you had like these extremely curious people dedicating their lives to looking at magnets and electric circuits and lightning and compasses and just staring at them to death, with all sorts of techniques, drawing them, talking to them, trying to derive equations, publishing papers, and as a group, eventually actually arriving at something that makes testable predictions with which you can, do engineering. That is obviously the way to go for consciousness research, and this is not a subtle difference. And this is not being done in academia at all, like zero, doesn't exist. It's even a lot worse than that. In some of the biggest psychedelic research labs out there, and I'm not gonna name which ones, I don't wanna get into trouble, but this is true. When you join the psychedelic research lab, you're actually asked to sign a contract that you're not going to talk about your personal psychedelic experiences with your colleagues, which I find personally very offensive. I would never join a group like that, which again, QRI is the complete opposite. Please, please share every detail, every phenomenological fact, every technical aspect of your experiences, because that is very valuable data to try to crack open the mystery of consciousness. Call to arms. So, if any one of you satisfy 3 or more of the following criteria, please talk to me, reach out, can be here, I'll be around tonight, also via email, Twitter messages, it doesn't matter, reach out. But essentially the following criteria. Number 1, expertise, hands-on expertise or theoretical expertise with physics or math, computer science, but especially physics or math. Number 2, meditator, like a serious meditator, meditates an hour a day, maybe has access to jhanas, maybe has, first path, etc., etc. Serious meditator, that's another very, very useful thing. Third, serious experience with psychedelics. I mean, I'm talking ideally something in the space of like 100 trips or more. Let's say with LSD, 2CB, DMT, ayahuasca, but okay, like substantial experience. And, maybe this sounds extreme, maybe not for this crowd, but among the people I talk to regularly, I count 3 people. This is not an encouragement, by the way, not an encouragement at all. And I'm serious about this. I count 3 people who have taken high-dose 5-MeO DMT every day for 6 months. And they're fine. And you can talk to them, they're not crazy, they still like math and philosophy, and they make sense. Now, they're very unusual people. They started very strange already. But they don't seem to be affected by delusions or like crazy brain worms or anything like that. So, for all we know, you can do it. You can do it. Now, again, I would much rather be that like it is that you already have the experience than like, okay, I'm gonna do this for Andres, like please don't. So that's like the third one. Fourth one, obviously this is a gradient, and of course we need kind of like a minimum of these, but it's essentially, good physical and mental health. Very, very important. The fifth one is very motivated, curious, and above all, confused about consciousness. I cannot tell you how much of a downer it is to hang out on psychedelics with somebody who's convinced they understand consciousness already. It's really off-putting. So if you're confused, you're in the right direction, because there are a lot of confusing things, and you should be confused. Things still don't make sense. Things still are forming. And the sixth one is substantial writing ability or skill, video skill, and in general art, visual art, audio art, especially of the more technical kinds. So again, yeah, you know, if you meet some of these criteria, you might actually be a candidate for something that we are forming. We haven't still fully announced this, but this in the works, which is, as a placeholder, we're gonna get a better name, but it's the Super Shulgin Academy, where essentially we literally do exactly what I was telling you. You know, highly technical, smart, introspective individuals, curious, who want to know and are confused, working together to crack open the equations of consciousness. So yes, please reach out if you know also somebody in those categories.
What's the best way to reach out?
Email is the most likely, but Twitter PMs should work. Yeah. And if you don't know my email, that's a test. You've got to find it. Okay, so I'm guessing they're still doing the sense. This is a kind of a so much suspense. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about meditation. So, for the longest time, meditation was relatively uninteresting to me, because I would do like 20 minutes of mindfulness meditation, just trying to follow the breath. I would get a little bit calmer, but I wouldn't get like anything particularly strange or interesting or like life-changing. It just kind of like was maybe like chamomile tea sort of thing. It's like, yes, it is life-enhancing. I'm just not so sure it's worth the 20 minutes. There was like a feeling like that probably went on for like 6 years or more. But here's like the frame I'm gonna try to share with all of you guys. You know how, and I'm sure this is probably familiar to a lot of you because, yeah, the type of people that this event attracts. And again, I hope I'm not offending anybody, but in general, they teach math pretty poorly, right? Like, it's so much more interesting when you're actually trying to engage with a problem you're very curious about. Personally, I used to do like Math Olympiad things. That was very engaging. It's okay, there's like this big puzzle. I'm gonna try to work with it. It's entertaining, it's at my skill level. When you're kind of engaged in that way, it's just actually really fun. You get something out of it. You notice the growth inside of you. On the other hand, right, if learning math is something like just rote learning, how to solve an equation or how to multiply a matrix, and they literally ask you to, multiply a 5x5 matrix, and that's what comes in the exam sort of thing. That is not math, right? Like, that's something else. It's just kind of like a ritual. It's like the teacher and the student in some kind of contract where it's like, I pretend that you're teaching math and I pretend that, I'm learning math and like, it's good to go. And like, we pretend like that happened, but nothing actually happened inside of you, right? I think with meditation, that is kind of like the framework I would encourage to think about. I think there are wonderful meditation teachers out there, but in general, meditation tends to be taught as kind of this ritual, this kind of like rite, this sort of thing like incantation, something that you're gonna do it, like 10 minutes a day, 20 minutes a day. You do these, just follow the breath, just like do a body scan, just do these, keep doing it, don't worry about the results. Again, like the Zen dogmaticism, you're like, don't evaluate it, don't think about it, just do it. That is, I think, the same approach to like us, study math or something like that. You can do it so much better. So, one example of how to do this, and like very, very, very concrete, very applied, is paths towards achieving the jhanas. I was talking to Ellie, is your name? Yes, awesome. Yeah, talk to him about jhanas. He has a lot of fun things to say about it. But yeah, essentially there's like two broad approaches for how to experience the jhanas. The first one is to just cultivate super strong concentration. That is like the path where for a number of years you will just cultivate, follow the breath. That's actually very hard because you don't get that much feedback about like, hey, am I approaching the jhanas or not? And actually trying to approach the jhanas that way is counterproductive. If you're kind of like asking like, oh, am I concentrating enough? That actually kind of like taking you off the concentration. And you kind of like need a really optimal setting for something like that. It works for some people. Again, I'm not gonna say it doesn't work for everybody. A completely different approach for which you have a lot of feedback, immediate feedback, right away from the very first session, is the following, which is find in your body something that is pleasant. Really could be anything. It could be like a sense of feeling fresh. It could be a sense of warmth. It could be a tingling sensation in the stomach, or it could be a kind of like relaxation in your head. Literally anything that feels good. And then what you try to do is slowly spread it and amplify it, absorb into it, suffuse into it, intensify it, and enjoy it as much as possible. And essentially you just do that. But do not approach this as a kind of like ritual or as an incantation, or as kind of like, oh, am I enjoying it? No, 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 no. Here is where your intelligence comes into play. Use your intelligence. The question is, I'm having this ember of pleasure here. What do I need to do right now? In the state of consciousness I'm in. Awesome. In the state of consciousness I'm in right now. What do I need to do to shield this ember? Or do I need to maybe add some like oxygen to it? Or do I need to kind of like fan it? Or I need to spread it? Or like what do I do to it to make it grow? And the answer is, it's gonna be very state dependent. There's no universal formula. Sometimes the way to make the ember of pleasure grow is by imagining a cute puppy. Seriously, sometimes that works. Try it out. Some other times, the thing that works is, thinking about a very moving movie that you saw at some point and seeing if you can recollect that sense of joy that you experienced. Sometimes it's gonna be imagining that you're entering a warm jacuzzi, and maybe that will do it. And sometimes it will be when you imagine somebody giving you a hug. Again, use your intelligence. Use your intelligence. Play with it. Enjoy it. Find the pleasure in the practice. Don't think of it as a chore. The moment you think of it as a chore, that's a downer. That will extinguish that ember. Make it yours, make it grow, make it fun. And that is the path. And here is a place where actually the thinking mind and the evaluative mind may not actually be getting in the way. May actually be good because it gives you suggestions, it gives you things to do and things to try. If you have a, systematizer, hyperdimensional type of way of thinking, that actually might be very good fit for this kind of practice. Which is, again, the opposite of like, don't think about it, don't evaluate it. Sometimes actually that may help. So again, use your intelligence and enjoy the practice. Okay, so it seems like, we probably have the bottle. So there may or may not be enough for everybody, but we do have like more that we're gonna make, and tomorrow in the morning, we're gonna finish distributing the rest. There's about like 200 of these vials. So, well, actually, you can apply it on your clothes or on yourself. It really doesn't matter. I would encourage, obviously, if it's outside of your comfort zone, of course, don't do it. But, okay, so the philosophy of this particular scent, VibeCam Recorder. This is the big release, guys. So, the VCR for this VibeCam. All right, so here's the idea for this one. What I did for this was make a pleasant scent. That was a constraint, and usually that's what I do. I make pleasant scents for people. Make a pleasant scent, but that is actually just unusual enough along some rather strange dimensions that is gonna be extremely unlikely that any of you have actually smelled a scent like this. There might be like some overlap with some things you've said, experienced before, but the idea is that like it will probably slot in your memory as like something new, or at least there's like some elements that are new. And actually, audience participation. I'm gonna be very curious if people want to shout out what you think is in it. Bubblegum.
Sandalwood.
Sandalwood. Lime. Amber. Salt. Interesting. Lemongrass. Grapefruit. Cinnamon. So it has a little bit of cinnamon. It has a little bit of lime. Something artificial. Oh, honeycomb. Do any of you like sense a little bit of smoke scent?
It's musky.
Musky. Musk. Yeah, it has a tiny bit of what's called a birch bark. Birch bark. What is it called? Tar. There you go. Awesome. Yeah, which is kind of like the classic smoke scent. Now it's very, very, very mild. Well, that particular element was kind of like to evoke the sense of it being a camp. You know, like how your clothes smell after you spend like a night in front of the campfire. There's a hint of that. Also, maybe some of you might notice guava, pineapple. Here's one that is kind of unusual for as using it as a base, which is a fenugreek. But quite centrally, and I guess nobody has mentioned this before, rose. Well, and it has a few other surprises, but all right, thank you everybody for the experience. All right, so so now I do know that some people will probably have to perform like at 8 p.m. somewhere, but there's a lot of these conversations from 7 to 9. I have a couple more things planned. I do want to give allow people to leave if they have to. Essentially, the two things that we have gonna go for is a guided meditation to try to essentially, especially for people who haven't really gotten any kind of like substantial sense of release or happiness from meditation. I'm gonna give you a short, about like a 20-minute playlist that essentially uses kind of some QRI ideas for how to anneal a very, very positive mood. And then I'm gonna stick around for a very general Q&A about QRI, quality computing, and anything anybody wants to ask me. If you didn't get your sent, come back here 10 a.m. We're gonna have like 100 more or so for people. Well, whoever wants to stick around for the guided meditation, yeah, get closer and get cozy.